Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we're going to explore one of the most baffling office disappearances in American history, the vanishing of Cynthia Jane Anderson. I want you to step back with us to Toledo, Ohio, August 4th, 1981. It's the middle of a hot summer Tuesday. Picture a small kind of neighborhood law office on East Manhattan Boulevard. The atmosphere should be one of quiet, professional efficiency. But when the two law partners return from their lunch break around noon, the scene they find is, well, it's not quiet. It is absolutely frozen. The front door is locked.
Yeah, locked. And not, with a key from the outside. It was locked from the inside.
Exactly, which is just weird.
And that detail right there, the internal locking, that immediately turns this into a classic locker room mystery, doesn't it? They have to force entry.
And inside?
Inside, it's completely static. The radio is still humming gently, tuned to some local station. Cynthia Anderson's desk, she was their reliable 20-year-old legal secretary. It's perfectly prepared for the afternoon's work.
Her car.
Locked. Sitting right where it should be in the parking lot. Everything suggests the day was proceeding totally normally, except, the absolute absence of Cindy herself.
That tidiness, that vacuum. It's what makes this case so haunting, I think. How does a young woman just vanish from a seemingly secure workplace in broad daylight?
Right. Leaving behind zero signs of a struggle.
But maybe offering a few chilling, sort of coded messages. We're going to unpack the known facts, scrutinize the strange clues, and try to synthesize the decades of speculation surrounding what is now Ohio's longest active missing person case.
It really demands we go beyond just the surface facts, We need to look at the psychological complexities surrounding Cynthia Anderson.
Because the clues here aren't really physical traces like bloodstains or fingerprints.
No, not in the usual sense. They're more like reflections of an internal pre-existing fear. Let's start with Cynthia herself and the sort of dark context leading right up to August 4th. Because the sources show she wasn't just a secretary. She was a woman already deeply troubled by something unseen.
Okay, let's unpack that context. Cynthia Jane Anderson, Cindy. 20 years old, known by her employers, everyone really, as incredibly punctual, dependable.
Yeah, deeply rooted in her life there in Toledo. When someone so routine vanishes, the assumption quickly shifts, doesn't it? From she left to she was taken. What's immediately compelling, and frankly pretty heartbreaking, is the amount of psychological turmoil she seems to have been experiencing right before she disappeared.
You mean the anxiety?
Exactly. The sources confirm that in the weeks, maybe months, before August 4th, Cindy had become increasingly fearful, anxious. She told her family and her coworkers pretty explicitly that she was being plagued by recurring vivid nightmares.
And these weren't just vague bad dreams, were they? They were disturbingly specific.
They really were. She described dreaming that she was being kidnapped and then murdered. That level of personalized dread, it suggests either an overwhelming amount of stress, maybe from the job, maybe personal life, we don't know.
Or genuine premonition.
Or genuine premonition of danger, Either way, it establishes that she felt she was under threat psychologically long before anything physical might have happened. This intense, articulated fear is just a foundational layer to this whole mystery.
And this distress, it manifested physically within her workspace too, didn't it? Which gives us one of the case's most unusual details. Those Bible verses on her office wall.
Ah, yes. This is such a crucial detail. It adds this really complex layer of, religious and maybe existential introspection. We know she'd handwritten Bible verses on her office wall.
Which coworkers noted as being a bit unusual for her, right? Even though she had a strict religious background.
Right. And the specific content of these verses, often revolving around themes of the return of Christ, the final days, stuff like, behold, I come quickly. It suggests a woman maybe wrestling with concepts of judgment or escape or some kind of spiritual crisis.
So what do we make of that? Was she trying to comfort herself because of the anxiety? Or was it something deeper, like a crisis of faith, maybe even guilt, that was feeding into her overall mental state?
It could easily be both, couldn't it? For investigators, these verses, they kind of provide two important insights. First, they confirm her heightened anxiety, her search for comfort or guidance, whatever it was.
Okay.
Second, if she disappeared voluntarily, and that's a big if, these verses could be read as her preparing for some kind of self-imposed exile, fleeing a perceived danger, maybe spiritual, maybe psychological.
But if she was abducted?
Then they simply reflect the vulnerable mindset of the person who was targeted. Regardless, they were part of the scene before whatever happened. They signal this internal struggle that maybe made her more susceptible to an external threat.
Okay, let's pivot now to the scene itself on August 4th, 1981. When the law partners arrive back at noon, we've got the locked door, the general tidiness. How did investigators systematically confirm this was likely an abduction, not just her walking off the job?
Well, the physical evidence, or lack thereof, inside the office strongly indicated a day that was just abruptly halted. Doors locked from the inside, suggesting closure.
But the radio was playing.
Exactly, suggesting continuity. Her coat was still hung up, the desks were ready, and the first absolute confirmation she was even at work was her car locked, sitting right in its spot outside. She arrived, she started her day, and then snap. The routine broke.
Usually in a crime scene, you're looking for disruption, right? Overturned furniture, something broken. But here, the absence of disruption is the clue.
Precisely.
So what specific items were missing, and how does that contrast with the total lack of any physical struggle?
This is probably the most profound complication of the whole case. There was zero physical evidence of a struggle. No lamps knocked over, no scuff marks on the floor, no signs someone forced their way in. It just speaks to a very controlled situation.
Okay.
Yet, two critical items were missing: her purse and her car keys.
Which seems counterintuitive for an abduction scenario, doesn't it?
It really does. If a perpetrator is forcing her out, why bother taking the purse? Why grab the keys to a car they're just going to leave behind in the lot? If they were rushed, you wouldn't think they'd pause for those specific items.
So what does that suggest?
Well, the fact that the keys and purse were gone suggests either she took them willingly, planning to leave.
The voluntary departure idea.
Right. Or the abductor meticulously gathered them to complete the illusion of a voluntary exit, which points to a highly organized, maybe even staged, criminal act.
Let's go back to the core paradox here, that locked door. If she was abducted, how did the perpetrator manage to lock the door from the inside on their way out? Was it a standard deadbolt or something else?
That's a great question, and it's pretty technical but really crucial. This wasn't a deadbolt that needs a key on both sides. The office used a common type of exterior door lock back then. You could engage it using a little button or a switch on the inside handle, and then just pull the door shut behind you.
Ah, okay, so you could lock it as you were leaving without needing a key from the outside.
Exactly. Which means the perpetrator, after forcing or maybe enticing Cindy to leave the room, had just seconds to press that internal lock mechanism and pull the door shut behind them.
Simulating the last person leaving for the day or for lunch.
Precisely. And that speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the killers or abductors. Familiarity with the building's routine, its security setup. They likely locked it from the inside, specifically to delay discovery, calculating that the law partners wouldn't be back until noon.
But the paradox just deepens when we think about what was happening in the weeks leading up to this. We know she was already getting threats, right?
Absolutely. Cindy was already a target. She'd been getting a series of strange, harassing phone calls, directed specifically to her at the law office before August 4th.
So this wasn't random.
That background is critical because it really moves the case away from some random, opportunistic crime and points towards something highly calculated, highly targeted.
Yeah.
And the law partners, her bosses, they were aware of this danger.
Which is why they installed that safety measure, the panic button.
Yes, exactly. Because these calls were escalating, or at least worrying enough, they installed a buzzer system right beneath her desk. It was connected directly to the business next door to instantly summon help. This was meant to be her lifeline, her safety net. And this detail, the failure of that safety net, is just, it's truly chilling. The buzzer system was not activated.
Wow. So what does the complete silence of that alarm tell us about those moments right before she disappeared?
It really only gives us two main scenarios, and neither one is comforting. Scenario one, she knew the person.
An acquaintance, a client.
Could be. Someone she recognized walked in. She maybe willingly unlocked or opened the door, and then the transition from trusted face to lethal threat was just too fast for her to react. She never got the chance to hit the button.
Okay, what's scenario two?
Scenario two, the perpetrator was just incredibly proficient, so physically commanding, or the act itself was so swift, so silent, so unexpected that she was neutralized instantly. physically unable to even move her hand towards the buzzer.
Mm.
In either case, it suggests the abductor was operating with absolute control, perfect timing. They eliminated any chance of resistance or her calling for help.
Okay, so if the unused panic button suggests this terrifying efficiency, then the only piece of physical evidence that seems to speak, that almost screams, is that romance novel found open on her desk. This really feels like the linchpin of the whole mystery, doesn't it?
It is. It's the single most tangible, possibly deliberate piece of evidence left at the scene, and it just demands interpretation. The book itself was just a standard paperback romance novel, common office reading back then, found face down on her desk.
Suggesting she'd been reading it that morning before whatever happened.
Right, before she was interrupted. But the level of detail about the page it was open to, that's what really captivated investigators from the start.
What specifically was described on that open page? What was the content?
Well, the book was open exactly, to the only violent scene contained within the entire narrative.
The only one?
The only one. And the sources describe that scene as depicting the heroine of the story being abducted at knife point.
Wow. Okay, so you juxtapose that fictional violence against this otherwise immaculate, peaceful, silent crime scene.
And the ambiguity just becomes profound, doesn't it? Was this just a horrible coincidence? Or was it some kind of message?
Right. Let's break down the two main competing interpretations that have pretty much defined this investigation for decades. The first one, maybe the most hopeful in a way, is interpretation one, the coded message.
The coded message theory basically grants Cindy some agency in her final moments. This view suggests that maybe realizing she was seconds away from being taken, she deliberately, perhaps even reflexively, opened the book to that specific violent scene.
As a way to communicate.
Her final, silent communication to the outside world. A desperate way of saying, this is happening to me and this is how it happened. It was violent, possibly involving a knife, just like in this story.
But that relies on her being able to think incredibly quickly under intense, unexpected duress, doesn't it? It paints her as really resourceful, trying to leave a clue.
Precisely. If she felt she was about to be overpowered or silenced, this act would be kind of like a dying declaration, wouldn't it? Using the familiar context of her reading material to deliver a specific, maybe undeniable message about the nature of her abduction. It's a tragic, quick-witted attempt to override the silence being imposed on her.
Okay, but then we have to pivot to interpretation two, which feels, well, arguably much darker, the psychological taunt.
This interpretation suggests the complete opposite, that the abductor, not Cindy, deliberately staged that scene with the book.
Why would they do that?
Well, if we go back to her history, those harassing phone calls, her specific recurring nightmares about being kidnapped and murdered, it becomes plausible that the perpetrator knew her internal world. They might have been studying her, cataloging her fears, maybe even feeding her paranoia over the phone calls.
So if they knew about her nightmares, they might recognize the significance of a book scene describing an abduction.
Absolutely. The psychological taunt theory implies this level of intimacy, this control, that goes way beyond just a simple abduction. In this scenario, the abductor maybe forces Cindy out or incapacitates her, notices the novel she was reading, and then in this terrifying, calculated moment of pure malice, opens it deliberately to the single violent scene that mirrors her fate.
That's chilling.
It's the ultimate personalized insult, isn't it? A way of confirming her worst fears, leaving a signature that basically screams, I knew you, I watched you, and I control this entire thing. This scenario really strengthens the idea that the crime was premeditated, not opportunistic, and that the perpetrator likely gained entry through trust or some kind of trickery.
And the decision to stage the scene like that, to lock the door meticulously, to leave that novel open just so, it would indicate immense confidence on the part of the perpetrator, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. They weren't rushing to escape. They were focused potentially on delivering a very specific message to the investigators, to the partners who would find the scene.
And that confidence is terrifying in itself.
It is. And it links directly back to that idea that the phone caller might have escalated. Maybe the harassment wasn't just about making noise. Maybe it was about gathering psychological intelligence to maximize the trauma, to control the aftermath, staging the scene perfectly, contrasting the fictional violence with the real-life quiet vacuum. It turns the entire office into a piece of calculated dark performance art for the law partners to discover.
So the ambiguity around the novel, around the locked door, it meant that from 1981 onward, investigators basically had to pursue multiple conflicting avenues. Let's look at the main investigative theories that the police established early on.
Okay. Well, the initial priority, quite understandably, was the phone caller. Given that documented history of strange and harassing calls directed specifically at Cindy, the most logical sequence seemed to be that the verbal stalker finally escalated to physical abduction.
Right.
And this theory probably gained some weight when authorities looked at comparable cases from that era where phone stalking proceeded to disappearance. The big problem was the identity of this caller remained completely elusive.
And then that critical detail of the crime scene, the lack of struggle that pushed them strongly towards the acquaintance theory, didn't it?
It really did. The sheer lack of any sign of a fight is probably the biggest thing supporting the acquaintance theory. If Cindy had screamed or fought back significantly, you'd expect the panic buzzer to have been tripped, or at least for the office to be in some disarray.
So the simplest explanation.
The most straightforward explanation for her smooth removal, and possibly for how the perpetrator got in without force, is that she willingly, or at least without immediate resistance, opened the door for someone she recognized.
Which could be anyone from a distant friend to a delivery person, or maybe...
Or perhaps most worryingly, a client of the law firm.
Yeah, given the setting, the law-client connection seems inevitable. Law firms, even small neighborhood ones like this in Toledo, they often deal with individuals facing pretty severe legal problems, many of whom might be volatile or desperate.
Exactly. Yeah. So investigators poured a significant amount of time into scrutinizing the law firm's clientele. They looked for clients with known histories of violence, clients who might have recently lost a case, or just individuals who might harbor some kind of grievance against the firm itself.
And Cindy, as the secretary, might be seen as an accessible representative or target.
Right, viewing her as an accessible face of the organization they were angry with. Now, this did yield quite a few persons of interest over the years, but it never produced that key suspect or that crucial piece of evidence linking a client directly.
Okay, so let's fast forward. 4 decades later, the case gets absorbed by the internet true crime community, and the complexity of the law firm's caseload seems to have birthed what's probably the most notorious modern theory, the drug ring retaliation.
Yes. The law office, like many small firms, handled a whole range of cases, and that apparently included some clients accused of drug trafficking. The drug ring theory mostly stems from a specific claim made years later by a convicted drug dealer who was acting as an informant.
What did he claim?
He alleged that Cindy's disappearance, and he implied her death, was actually a form of retaliation tied directly to that criminal network. The specific claim was that Cindy had somehow overheard sensitive or damaging information related to the drug operations of one of the firm's clients.
That's a huge claim. It completely escalates the motive from personal harassment or stalking to, organized crime hitting back. But the sources note a pretty significant caveat regarding that informant, right?
Yes, and it's absolutely vital we maintain skepticism here. The authorities apparently never verified this story. Informants, as we know, often provide information that might complicate or muddy an investigation, sometimes for their own personal benefit, things like plea deals or maybe reduced sentences.
So while the firm's client list provides a sort of plausible environmental motive.
Exactly. The lack of any corroborating physical evidence or any confirmation from law enforcement means this really remains firmly in the realm of high-stakes speculation, fueled primarily, I think, by the online interest in conspiracies and more complex scenarios.
Okay. There's another line of online speculation that focuses much more heavily on those personal, internal elements we talked about earlier, the self-departure or maybe religious guilt theory.
Right. Online sleuths, especially those who focus on the Bible verses and her documented extreme anxiety, they often explore the possibility that Cindy might have engineered her own disappearance.
How would that work?
Well, this theory suggests that her sense of religious urgency or maybe psychological pressure became so overwhelming that she decided to stage an abduction, maybe locking the door from the inside herself to delay detection in order to basically start a new life, get away from whatever intense pressures and fears she was feeling.
So this theory tries to explain the locked door and the absence of a struggle without needing a third-party perpetrator.
Exactly. It uses her internal emotional state as a key driver for the event. And coupled with this sometimes is the speculation that her chronic maybe debilitating anxiety and those really vivid nightmares. Maybe they stem from some underlying undiagnosed mental health condition.
But again, the caveat.
Again, we absolutely have to reiterate the critical source caveat. There is zero concrete evidence to support a self-departure. Her family life, her professional life seems stable, apart from those harassing phone calls. It makes this theory feel more like an academic speculation rather than a solid investigative lead.
So why? Why does this case, now over 4 decades old, remain so persistently popular in true crime forums, on YouTube channels, and online analysis? What is the enduring cultural legacy of the Cynthia Anderson vanishing?
I think it's because it's almost a perfect convergence of mystery tropes, isn't it? It's the longest active missing persons case in Toledo, which gives it that regional significance. But globally, it resonates because it involves this stunning contrast. You've got faith, premonition, possibly coded messages.
Set against this very sterile, professional, supposedly secure environment?
Exactly. The idea that a secure workplace could be so easily infiltrated, so controlled, is just deeply unnerving, especially, I think, to a modern audience.
It feels like the ultimate vanishing without a trace, but from a highly contained, observable space.
And that's why online investigators continually draw these comparisons. They map the elements, the fear, the potential stalking, the abrupt, inexplicable nature of her disappearance onto more recent high-profile unsolved cases. People often mention Jennifer Kess or Maura Murray.
Similar elements.
In each case, you often have a young woman, a sudden break in her routine, maybe strong indicators of some pre-existing risk or surveillance, and then just this total, absolute vacuum of physical evidence.
Yeah.
Cynthia Anderson's case feels almost foundational to that modern fascination with the office or the home as the setting for the Impossible Vanishing Act.
Okay, so if we try to synthesize all this material, all these threads, why does Cynthia's case endure for over 40 years? What's the takeaway?
I think it endures because it just resists any easy categorization.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the idea that sometimes the most important evidence isn't forensic, it's psychological, it's circumstantial. You have this haunting blend of the highly personal clues, the nightmares, the novel, the verses, contrasted so starkly with the professional, secure setting and the chilling efficiency suggested by that locked door.
It feels less like a random crime of opportunity and much more like the conclusion of some kind of highly specialized, calculated project directed at her specifically.
I tend to agree. We have to analyze how those intertwining pressures might have been exploited. Her extreme psychological anxiety, the potential religious crisis hinted at by the verses, and that undeniable environmental pressure from the harassing calls, maybe pressures from the job itself.
All making her vulnerable.
All of these factors could have made her a specifically targeted victim, someone whose existing vulnerabilities were perhaps known and then deliberately weaponized. It feels like the perpetrator didn't just stumble upon Cindy. They might have chosen her because of her pre-existing fears.
And the biggest strategic failure in all of this, the thing that screams out, remains that unused safety net, the panic buzzer.
That silence is perhaps the single most significant analytical detail we have. The fact that she was taken, apparently without activating that system, tells us one of two things, really. Either the perpetrator established enough trust for her to open the door willingly and then acted instantly.
Before she could react.
Right. Or they incapacitated her so rapidly, so completely, that her conscious mind simply never had a chance to register the need to react. Either scenario paints this picture of a predator who was either intimately familiar with her and her routines or just exceptionally skilled and ruthless in their execution. That unused buzzer pretty much eliminates the possibility of a prolonged struggle or some unknown person forcing entry aggressively.
And this really spotlights the hidden dangers that can exist even in what we perceive as safe everyday environments, doesn't it?
Precisely. Secure environments like small-town law offices, which often rely on familiarity and a degree of trust, sometimes conceal hidden dangers far greater than random street crime. These dangers can be related to volatile clients who feel wronged by the firm, or maybe deeply personal conflicts that just happen to utilize the workplace as their setting.
Maybe the initial investigators focused too much on standard stranger abduction scenarios.
It's possible. But the clues we have, the prior harassment, the specific office setting, the locked door, the lack of struggle, they all seem to point towards a danger originating from someone Cindy likely would have encountered or been aware of through her professional life or the periphery of it.
So after more than 40 years of tips, theories, online speculation, exhaustive reanalysis, where does the investigation truly stand today? What's the bottom line?
We really have to conclude with a reality check, I think. Despite the almost literary eloquence of the clues, the silent alarm, the open novel, the lock turned from the inside, and no definitive physical trace of Cynthia Anderson or what happened to her has ever been found. The ultimate truth is just the vacuum. A young woman vanished completely, and that office scene remains frozen in time, perpetually waiting for an explanation that, so far, has never arrived.
It's a mystery just defined by contradiction, isn't it? The appearance of a voluntary departure may be juxtaposed with the violent message potentially implied by that novel. The meticulous planning that seems evident in the staging, contrasted against the complete failure of the perpetrator to leave behind any definitive forensic evidence. And that's the eerie image we're left with. Cynthia's office on East Manhattan Boulevard, locked from the inside, the radio humming quietly, the novel open to the violent page, a scene eternally waiting for her return or an explanation. We encourage you, as you think about this, to consider the implications of that open novel. Was it a subtle, coded message from Cindy herself under duress, trying to warn investigators about a violent abduction? Or was it something else, a deliberate psychological taunt left by an abductor who knew her deepest fears? Which interpretation do you find more compelling? Next time on Threads of Truth, we revisit the mysterious disappearance of Brendan Lee Lawson, exploring new evidence, modern reanalysis of the 911 call, and whether the truth behind his final words may finally be within reach. We hope you join us.